So I always warn people, whenever somebody feels like there's one problem that they have that'll fix everything, you always have to be really cautious of that. So I want to warn against that, but then I'm going to say that I do feel like...
Honestly, I get shamed for it sometimes because people are like, oh, you go wrong, man.
But in the United States, we engage in really heavy forms of price discrimination, meaning very few people, if any, at certain schools pay the sticker price. I think we have to make smarter decisions around going to college. If your grades aren't that good...
But that isn't true. We actually see in large mass how media really influences talking points socially, and how the hyperfixation on certain media companies or whatever it might be to engage in certain issues actually drives a lot of the public discourse. I don't think it just happens like, oh, people grassroots on Twitter start talking about things and then politicians follow suit. I don't believe that. I think it's a mixture of those two things. You don't think so, or no?
It's a feedback loop. Like, yeah, media can push us in a certain direction, but also people want to see that type of media. People don't want to see like educational, well-informed, like thoughtful media. They want to see like the hyper-partisan shit. That's what people like.
So I've been getting people bombarding me with TikToks of folks saying they're struggling and they're living paycheck to paycheck on 120K combined income.
Kill me, dude.
Hey, listen, I gotta talk about this because I feel like I'm being gassed. I feel like folks are trying to turn me crazy, and I don't understand this. Okay, even in some of the most expensive cities, I don't foresee a scenario in which you make 120K combined income and you're struggling unless you've made some really poor financial investments or decisions.
It's called big student loans, door dashing every other day, Starbucks every day, living in a $4,000 a month apartment, and having a $700 a month lease. That's what it is. Yeah, these people are wild today. I don't know how. Yeah, you see it a lot. It feeds into the whole. The thing is that it's the perfect fodder for all of the spoiled rich white kids on the internet that need like something to complain about, where they come on and they're like, oh, but like, can I really complain about like being poor when my mom and dad paid for everything and I'm making 120K a year? And it's like, oh my God, I can be poor and still make 120K a year. Like, it's totally fine because capitalism in the system, and it like feeds into that sort of like mentality. So people eat it the fuck up. They slurp it up.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic in the fact that with inflation and a lot of things going up with rent prices and stuff, the way that you used to spend money just no longer allows for you to have the flexibility that you used to have. I can see how the gas and all these things increasing like really fucks with like the way you manage your budget. But at the same time, that's where the adjustments have to come in. I feel like a lot of people don't do that. And if you talk to people and you ask them like, have you ever done a budget? Most of them will say no.
Yeah.
They don't. They see their money disappearing, but if you really like looked into their expenses, they don't actually know exactly how it disappears. But I'm open to learning, and I see there's even people in your live stream chat that are saying, well, I make 80 or 90K a year and I'm struggling. I would love for these people to come on stream and like break
Talk
down
about their
budget.
life. Yeah, give me your budget.
I want them to break down their budget and prove to us that it's circumstantial, that it's not their own choices and their own poor decisions, but it's actually because things have gotten expired. So if you got fans or something like that want to come on, I'd love to hear. I'd be curious if somebody come on and red pill me about this shit, because I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Like I know too many people making far less money and making it work.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these people don't even. I got so much shit over this before, and I still stand by it. Where we spoke up a lot about like people can't afford certain areas to live in, blah blah blah. And my thing was like, listen, if you can't afford your apartment, then fucking move. Why the fuck are you in a place you can't afford? And the amount of pushback I got from people that have never done anything in their life, like, when you're poor, you can't just move. You don't understand. I was like, what the fuck do you mean you can't move when you're poor? And then people are essentially like, do you know how expensive moving trucks and movers cost? And it's like, bro, when you're poor, you don't pay for moving trucks and movers. You grab 4 employees from your job, you get some fucking beat up boxes that are in the back because every job fucking orders shit. You buy like 3 pizzas and then you get a friend with a truck and you move shit over the weekend. Or if you're like, what about your security deposit? You can't afford it. It's like people are acting like you're trapped in one place for your entire fucking life. And it's like moving and like controlling like rent and car are the 2 biggest expenses you have. Why are you guys saying it's impossible to leave? Like, you just kill yourself when you can't afford your rent anymore? Like, it's time to commit suicide? Like, yeah, I don't know. People are super fucking insane
the
over.
Thing is this is nonsense. If you know by moving you're going to be saving $300 to $400 a month, you're paying for that mover in 3 to 4 months.
Sure.
Max.
Or even like $150, $200 a month, depending on what you're doing. Yeah, like, yeah, but it's just,
if you're moving within the same city, moving is not that expensive.
Yeah.
Unless
Yeah. People are saying like that's thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah, I'm like, dude,
no,
what do you? Yeah.
It's super expensive if you're going like far away, absolutely. But people moving within the same city to a cheaper area, like, that's just not happening. The moving costs that they're describing are just not real. I want to hear it from their mouths. I want them to break down their budget, and I want to see it happen in real time. Yeah. I would love to see that happen in real time. Because again, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But the expenses that they're describing, when I hear people say stuff like, "Oh my God, groceries went up $150," like, bitch, you're not living paycheck to paycheck because groceries went up $150 a month. You're not living paycheck to paycheck because your gas went up $200 a month. That meant that in disposable or extra income, you only had 350 difference, and now you're struggling. That means you weren't saving even before.
Yeah,
Like,
maybe a little. I'd be careful on because depending on how you're living, 200 or 300 bucks a month can be quite a bit, I think. But
yes, yes. If you already are living on really low income, I'm talking about people who are high earners and they're describing this stuff. That means you weren't saving any money beforehand. Like okay, how much do you think people should be saving a percentage of their income, generally speaking? If you're making
super
like,
depends
above, like,
between
around
working
middle
class. At the very least, I always say max out your 401k match, which is going to be 3 to 6% of your paycheck, and then max out your IRAs. Those are the two big ones you should always be hitting, which is about 5 to 6,000 a year in the United States. And then
Okay,
yeah.
okay, that's good. That's good. That's good right there. So what if you're looking at 5 to 6 thousand a year that you're ideally saving? This is we're being like middle class in a decent area where you're not paying out the wazoo. If you go from paycheck to paycheck because two to three things became more expensive by like maybe 50%, already there that means that you weren't saving that kind of money. That your savings should be the ones doing the dipping, but it shouldn't be everything else. When I hear the financial stuff that most people reference, it just doesn't amount to the kind of dire situation that paycheck to paycheck indicates. You get what I'm trying to say?
Sure. Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Most of my issues have to do with certainly really really wealthy people, or like upper middle class people that are complaining about the paycheck to paycheck stuff that I don't believe should be living paycheck to paycheck. If they are, they can make different decisions. Like
Yeah. I had this guy. He was 26, and he told me he was living. He was living. Where was he living? He was living in I think it was right outside of Baltimore, living in the suburbs. But he said he was paying $2,600 a month at 25 years old for rent. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, okay. He's like, it's really killing my money. I'm like, why do you live alone? He's like, what do you mean? He's like, why don't you just get a roommate or like live in a situation where you can like split some of the bills? He's like, I don't want a roommate. I'm like, okay. I could understand that the situation you're living isn't ideal. And if you're like an older person or you got kids, you're in a couple, like living with roommates, this is not feasible. But like if you're in your young 20s, like why are you taking on this kind of rent that you can't afford in the area? If you just won't get a roommate or something like that. Like
Yeah,
there's
that's
certain
another thing
things
too,
for
I
young
guess.
people that I think are very valid that I wouldn't say for older people. But like, bro, you're just living above your means. Like you should be somebody who be living with other people. If you're 32 and you don't want to do that, like I understand. Like that's different to me. But at 25, like why are you on your own and just paying this much money? You could cut your expenses in half with just that. Am I crazy? Now people got mad because I said that, but I'm like, bro, at your age, you shouldn't be trying to be like, I want to live by myself. I'll go broke to do it. Like that's stupid to me. But maybe it's just me.
It's a huge luxury. Yeah.
There is one class of people. My parents were like this, where they were house rich and money poor, where they over leveraged themselves to get the biggest house they could, have a huge fucking mortgage payment every month. They were collectively making like $140,000 a year, but we were actually poor. It was like, looking back on it, it's wild to think about with that income.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah. I've never lived on my own ever. I've always had a roommate. Usually it's my girlfriend. But yeah, I can't imagine being poor and like trying to live alone. Everything is like 2x the cost. That's insane. And like it's 2x the cost on like some of your biggest things. It's going to be like your monthly like heating and electricity. It's going to be your rent. Like that sounds horrible. But
where do you think people are making valid criticisms when it comes to circumstances being untenable in terms of like societally speaking? So
rents are exploding
right.
in like every city. We have to do something to bring down rents. It's becoming insane. Or it is insane. It already is insane, yeah. Something there has to give at some point. We need to start bulldozing. I honest to God, I think there should be a federal order where we just start to steal people's houses and land and just bulldoze and do it. I'm so tired of living. It even happens here in Miami. It even happens here in Miami Beach, where I'm in like a fucking high-rise, 35 fucking story apartment, and then I go across the street and there's these like 2 like room duplexes. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Like these fucking shitty, dilapidated duplexes probably cost like $1.4 million for his duplex. And it's like, why? Like, just destroy it and like rebuild this shit so that it makes sense. Yeah, it's so fucking stupid. It's so like all the single family housing and all of these high rent areas just needs to be fucking stolen by the government. Pay them, 150% fair market rate for the property and kick them the fuck out. Gentrify it, whatever the fuck you want to call it, and start building like a real fucking city. Like pretend you're actually playing a real video game and build like you would, like you're trying to get a high score, and not the autistic fucking zoning shit we've got today. We've got like 30-story high rises next to disgusting single family houses that are like filled with people that can't even afford the area. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. All single family zoning needs to just be banned from these fucking areas, in my opinion. But
I disagree with that.
okay.
I think not every place should be New York or should look like New York. I don't think every place should just be filled with a bunch of skyscrapers to fit in as many fucking people into a tiny, densely area where at one point you're just walking around and all you see are just fucking tall buildings going 30 floors. Like, no, that's something I would never want to live in. And I think there's certain cities that do that, and generally those kinds of places lose in their entire like cultural identity.
No, that is so wrong. The cultural identity of these places is so much better. They have a way better culture because you're out on the street, you can visit places, you can see shit, and you can do shit. You know what has no cultural identity? Are fucking suburbs. San Francisco's suburbs, where you don't even know who the fuck is in your neighborhood, because if you want to go anywhere or do anything, you gotta hop in the fucking car and drive 20 minutes somewhere to do it. Fuck that. I think that going out and walking, even a place in Toronto I've been, fucking in Cabbagetown, in fucking in places in fucking LA, Glendale, like places where you can go outside on the street, walk around, go to fucking restaurants and shit, is so much nicer than having to fucking drive everywhere. That kills me. God, I hate it. In my opinion.
I don't disagree, but I think your solution to that is creating a bunch of apartment complex. My solution to that would be actually creating better infrastructure in terms of public transport, where living in a suburb doesn't mean you're fucking isolated from the rest of society without a car.
It sucks, but you can't. The thing is that you have to have apartments to do that, because you can't run buses to every single suburb.
Just the fact that you brought up buses is like the most American idea. That is not what any other city would do in terms of creating solutions for isolated suburbs. They would create public transport systems that are far more efficient than fucking buses.
Yeah, but
buses
you can't.
Are ran locally within a small area, not to bring you 45-minute bus rides to get you in and out of spots.
Yeah, but you can't rent any. Public transit works in high density areas. Low density areas don't work because you're running. It could be a bus, it could be a train, it could be whatever. But it's going to a place where 100 people live. There's going to be like one person on that thing. It's going to be so expensive. You have to have high density areas. It's the only place that public transit can work. Again, like think of like playing.
If you created a good train system, what ends up happening is that suburbs tend to grow around stations that have access to those places, or the train systems are efficient enough to run through those areas where there's high density people. So people traditionally move towards there. There's plenty of folks who live maybe like a 45-minute drive out of the city, but take a train that gets you there in 30 minutes, right? Rather than taking the traffic and doing all that stuff, you have efficient things where you can get from point A to point B. That's what creates different neighborhoods that, yes, whilst they are a distance away driving through like public transport, you get there very quickly.
But you can't grow a suburb around a train thing because it spreads out so much. That's the problem.
And generally, suburbs are actually tax negative. So even just running public transit there, you'd have to subsidize them insanely.
Yeah, it's just they're so fucking expensive. Because imagine if imagine you're playing a video game, you've got like a high rise with 1,000 people, and you've got a suburb with 1,000 people, and the suburb is occupying this fucking 5x5 square mile area, and then like the apartment complex is just right there. You've got 10x the people in it. You're running a train, like the amount of traffic you're gonna get through that, and it could be a train, it could be a tram, it could be a subway, it could be whatever. It's just so much higher. Whereas the suburbs are so spread out, and the utilization gets fucked on it, I think. But I mean, like any public transit would be better than none. But Americans are also like culturally predisposed to hating it as well because we associate it with poor losers. That's what our association is when it comes to buses.
Yeah, and I think the cultural, the financial, and I think also the health implications of that kind of mindset, guys, in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Because, as these populations grow, if you don't grow into efficient city management, at one point you're going to walk downtown and most of the city itself, and you're just going to see apartment complexes going on for like never ending point. You won't even be able to see the sun at any point of the day because you're going to be surrounded by buildings all the time. I don't think that kind of life for most people is what they would find appealing. In fact, most people speak to going to a lot of these cities where it's just a bunch of skyscrapers everywhere and hate it because it just feels like as a lifestyle, it doesn't feel great. And I also say, having visited Miami a few times, Miami isn't Miami because Brickell exists. Miami looks great because of the smaller neighborhoods where the buildings that you described would no longer be in existence. So I don't think the kind of city structure that you're describing would lead to good outcomes in long term. Not for
I mean, I'm trying
the
to think of
culture,
like,
not for
sure.
the culture, not for the culture, and not for the long term health of people.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when I grew up. I lived in a suburb, and when I wanted to go to a friend's house, I would either have to call or I'd have to walk down the street. I'd have to knock on his door, and then if he was available to play, then we'd play. Then we would have to, when we got old enough, then we could get on our bikes and go bike and meet another friend that might be in another part of the neighborhood. And like maybe we'll have like 3 or 4 friends to like do shit with. If we can bike around and like meet up and do all that shit. But when I would visit my grandma, who lived, and she didn't even live in a dense apartment complex, it was just like a row of townhomes. You could just go outside in the back, and there were always like 10 or 15 other kids playing. It was so easy to just like walk outside, and so many people are there. You've got the pool there, you've got everybody. You can go to people's houses, and if you go to somebody's house, you can walk back in like 5-10 minutes at the most, right? As opposed to having to bike everywhere and like find shit and or get a car depending on how far it is, crossing dangerous streets, etc. Like I don't know, I just that the dense lifestyle. I feel like sometimes it's described as like this horrible like dystopian lifestyle, but honest to God, it was just so much. It just felt so much funner, better, and more community driven in every way than just
when
suburbs.
you were living in apartment complexes versus like townhouses.
No, when it was townhouses, which I think are closer to apartment complexes than like suburbs, which are just so spread out.
I would think that townhouses are closer to suburbs than they are like apartment complex. Like I agree they are jam packed in, but to me, when I think of apartment complex, I'm thinking of 24 stacked on top of each other, building to building, like near each other. That doesn't give me the same vibe as townhouses. It does for you?
Well, I guess because when I was thinking of the fun thing in my townhouse, I'm thinking you go out back. There's a pool that's part of the townhouse complex, and all the other kids were always outside, like playing there. That doesn't feel like that's something that can happen in a suburb. I guess unless everybody's like friends with a guy that owns a pool, and like all the kids just run there all the time. Like you're just so much farther spread apart. You got to go through yards, you got to go down the street. Whereas in the townhouse shit, you would just go out back, and that's where everybody was.
I'm actually curious. Do you feel like suburbs foster better communities than apartment complexes?
Let me see. I'm trying to think.
I've lived in many apartments. You really feel like apartment complexes foster better sense of community than suburbs?
The problem is I can't answer that because I didn't live in apartments growing up as a kid. But I'm trying to imagine, like, if I was a kid, this would be the funnest thing in the world for me. But I don't know because I haven't had it. If I was a kid and I lived in an apartment complex and I was friends with people in the apartment complex, that honestly seems like the coolest thing in the world. That I could literally just walk across a hallway or take an elevator and then go visit a friend. That seems so awesome to me. That's like the funnest thing in the world. But I don't know. I've never lived in an apartment complex, so maybe it wouldn't feel that way. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Listen, everyone's gonna have their own individual experiences. So I think now we're just speaking to what personally living in a suburb and then living in townhouses and then also having lived in apartments. Like, there's no doubt that townhouses was probably the closest thing, and then suburbs afterwards. Apartment complexes, like, you're not really going to be kicking it with your neighbors like that or spending time, and especially for like young kids that I see in apartment complexes, that shit don't look nice. But some people might live a different experience. So I won't fight anybody who disagrees.
Sure. Yeah, I imagine some apartments can be shitty, but I guess my experience in suburbs is that like when I'm living on a block, like 80% of the people there are old as fuck. Like it's rare to even see another kid. So on my street. Ohio Street, Omaha, Nebraska, 106th about. When I'm living on the street, it's like 20 old people. There was one other kid that lived on my street behind me. That was Chris. And then maybe there's another kid that lives like a couple blocks away. But there's no children. There's like no kids. It's all old fucking people, boomers and shit. And it's like, fuck me. Like, whereas if I was in an apartment complex, it feels like I would have so much more access to other children. That sounds really weird at a complex. But yeah, I could be wrong. Maybe if I lived in a neighborhood where, because sometimes in sitcoms these shit, if I lived in a neighborhood where all of my neighbors were friends, I might prefer the suburb because now I can like go right outside and I've got like 20 fucking friends to play with. And that might be cool to run up and down a big street and everything. But yeah, that just wasn't my experience in suburbs. Everything was so fucking spread out that there were no friends that lived close by. That was just annoying. Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious, when you think of ideal cities that allow for affordable housing, right? Your solution, if you could choose, would be to build a bunch of apartment complexes and get rid of some of the single townhomes, right?
Yeah.
Well, what are some other changes that you do to make that place more affordable? I'm just curious because I don't know. You and I have traveled to Europe fairly often. And some of those cities are definitely not affordable. But if you move out to the suburbs, things become far more manageable and everyone takes trains into the city. You don't find that model far more appealing, irrespective of like cultural differences.
I don't know. What you're describing doesn't exist largely in the United States. It's pretty rare in the United States that people take trains into cities. I don't even believe that exists.
I agree.
I
agree with that. That's my whole point. You wouldn't find that model more appealing to import rather than just destroying a bunch of homes and putting skyscrapers. That's why I'm asking you.
I feel like the skyscraper area would be more affordable, and I think that there would be a lot of positive knock-on effects to that. So, for instance, if I live in a place with good public transit, I don't have to buy a car, so that immediately acts as a huge monthly payment and maintenance and all that bullshit. Um, that's a big one. Getting to people and like going to places is easier. So like I think that it should be a fucking law that anytime you build an apartment complex or a skyscraper or anything, there should always be zoning for first floor commercial property. So you should be able to walk around and like buy food, buy clothes, whatever the fuck should always be there. I just think that having like walkable, I mean, you can argue there are knock-on health effects. You're encouraged more to walk around or maybe even bike if you want to, rather than driving everywhere.
Sure.
Yeah, but I mean, like suburbs are probably could have stronger communities because the people are incentivized to live there longer, right? Like I don't know how often somebody's going to live for 15 years in an apartment complex, whereas in a neighborhood you might have people that live in the same house for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? Yeah, I don't know.
Right. When I think of when I'm visiting New York, generally speaking, like you have Manhattan, which is where the bougie and the rich live, and then you got all your skyscrapers over there, and you got the boroughs afterwards. And the boroughs work really efficiently, even for people working in Manhattan or out of it, because of the fact that the public transportation system is so efficient. Like it's not the greatest thing in the world, but I've taken the New York City train, and
Yeah, it's always
it's pretty
great.
good for what it does.
Yeah.
And it creates an environment where the suburbs that you would normally describe that are quite a far drive away are actually now their own ecosystems in a lot of ways, and everything that you described about having commercial property on the first floor isn't necessarily as mandatory because of the fact that you can go to your local areas and everything exists in these communities. But if you want to go downtown, you also have that as well. I feel like that model is more appealing to me than when I look at like Miami and you got those suburbs, and if you don't got a car, you're pretty much fucked. And so rather than think of just constantly building new skyscrapers and stuff like that, having a good public transport system like the one that New York has in a lot of these cities, I feel like that would create for better ecosystems. But maybe I'm wrong.
I guess
It's
like
just that-
I don't mind what you're saying.
go ahead.
I wish for the downtown areas the houses were gone. Like if you want to have like suburbs where people train in and shit, that's fine. But in your cities, just axe the single family housing. That's just wild to me. But because it just fucks the whole vibe up. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Have either of you been in Chicago?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just it kind of just is like the only model of public transit in America that I've actually like seen and experienced and actually works. But no matter what, I don't think there's a way you can ever escape high density urban areas to support all that infrastructure required for public transit.
Sorry, repeat that.
You have to have like a high density urban core to support that public transit. Like that just has to happen.
I actually agree with that.
What did you like so much about living in suburban shit? I'm just curious. You can tell me. Sell it to me.
You asking forethought or me?
Asking you.
For me, it was the affordability in terms of the place I could get. It was the size of the spot that I could get.
True.
Like when you go from living as like 4 or 5 people in a 2-bedroom apartment versus like you're paying less now for everyone gets their own rooms. Like that's just a luxury that you don't forget. Having a backyard. The suburb that I moved to at the time had a pool, and so you could have little community stuff that was there. And my suburb wasn't so like obnoxious that without a car you couldn't go to the grocery store. Like it was still fairly decent. And so yeah, for me it was just the affordability of it all. Now getting to town was a little bit tough. It took a long bus ride, but I did see the upside of it. And I think like if I lived in the city at the time where we had a good train to go into town, I think I would have been fine with that area, because like then it just becomes like, yeah, it just becomes your place.
Okay.
It just becomes your place, and it's just. I don't think the apartment idea is bad. I don't think everyone's built for it. And I think when you ask most people what they want for their life, when they think about having children and stuff like that, like most people don't want to have kids in apartments. Most people don't want to have.
I agree.
In an apartment, and nobody like I don't know. And this is just a stupid fear of mine, but I think about this because it happened to one of my uncles. But like his kid fell off the balcony. Now this is just an anecdotal thing, but when you're thinking about children and safety and well-being, like apartment is the last thing that you're generally thinking of.
I
but I don't-
totally
it's-
disagree.
yeah,
I feel
I mean,
like
it's
cars
still
are
is-
so dangerous.
Yeah, I feel like I can understand the feeling, but I think the data is just in the total opposite direction. Like, I think the biggest problem that kids have are things like abduction or things like getting hit by cars and traffic and everything. And living in like high density areas just kind of like eliminates that. Whereas in suburbs, I think you're way more likely to have to like even Nathan's school, I think it was like 5 minutes like walking from the house, and he has to cross like 2 major intersections just to get home. And it's like, yeah. But Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if like where you
Well,
grew
no,
up.
but
Or go ahead.
I'm curious. The first point I made about people not wanting to have their families in apartments, you acknowledge that?
Um, I felt that way initially. Now I don't know. Like I made sure that like Nathan's mom had a house so that he didn't have to live in an apartment because the feeling I had was like, yeah, it sucks for a kid to be born and raised in an apartment. But now I think I was just biased. I think I just had a feeling like that's what poor people do because that was just the feeling I had. Now Nathan is lucky in that Nathan is an awesome neighborhood where there's like 5 kids that go to his school that are like on the same fucking street. That's awesome. When I grew up and I was in the suburbs, again, I had one friend that lived behind me, and then we had to bike. Until we were old enough to bike, you had to beg mom or dad for a ride to a friend's house because you had to go like blocks and blocks and blocks away to find friends. But once we had bikes, you know, the neighborhood opens up a lot more. But if I could have grown up in an apartment complex with friends in the apartment complex, like living with for the 5 months of these fuckers stayed here. But when I moved to Miami and I had Mr. Moot and New Salt and Johnny all in the same apartment complex, the idea of like being able to just like message a friend and be like, hey, do you want to go out to eat real quick? And they're just right there. That type of convenience is fucking awesome. That was the coolest thing in my life. Yeah, and that was unmatched by suburb life. Like I never got that feeling at all. Like when you want to go out and do shit, you have to like make plans and stuff. You can't just do it spontaneously.
Here's the irony. The irony is that I think Americans may be the most in need of apartment complexes, but the most least likely to want to live there with their entire families. I feel like you guys just love space.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you guys like big land and large amount of like rooms and whatever, just big trucks, big things. And I think for Europeans, the idea of living in an apartment their whole lives is a little bit more normalized and actually a part of their reality.
Maybe, yeah.
Because I know a lot of people out there living in Europe who like do live in apartments and have lived there most of their lives, and it is more of a normalized thing. So I might warm up to the I probably warm up to the idea.
And again, it's probably going to depend on your experience and where you live too. But I will say, because I lived in suburbs for 30 years. I own 2 houses, and like my feeling was always that like you can probably find old VODs where I said this on stream, but if you go through where like I'll say like I'm never gonna live in an apartment. I like being in a house. I can fuck up the walls. I can scream and make as much noise as I want. I love houses. I'll never live in a fucking apartment. And I moved from Omaha, Nebraska. From my second house, I moved to Glendale, and after living in Glendale, I was like, for like 2 weeks, I was like, I'm never going to live in the suburbs again in my entire life. Being able to walk out onto the street, I can walk to the movies, I can walk to 100 different restaurants, I can walk out and grab a coffee immediately in the basement, or not the basement, the first floor of my apartment complex. I've got 3 awesome fucking restaurants. Like that was so awesome. And I was like, I cannot believe I ever lived in a suburb. So I don't know, maybe it just depends. Maybe there are really cool suburbs, and maybe there are really shitty apartments. I lived in apartments in Culver City, and those apartments sucked. I couldn't walk anywhere. Me and Malene had to drive 10 minutes just to get anywhere. Those apartments kind of suck. So I don't know, yeah, maybe just depends on.
I think it's what the people seek out. I agree with you. I personally love living centrally because I like biking to place. I like walking. I like the convenience of it. My life has been completely transformed for the last 8 years, being able to do that. But I know that there are a lot of individuals who, when they think of having their families, do not want that life for themselves. They want to be able to have access to a larger home with the rooms, with the backyard, with the gardening available. Like you and I don't engage in activities that generally require more and more space.
Sure.
A lot of other people have lifestyles where they want a patio and they want a deck and they want these things. And so it's just different mindsets. I would just like it that both of those possibilities are real, but I'm not against what you're saying. I do like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, you just feel healthier when you're just constantly moving about your city and have reasons to walk around. You have,
yeah, like even for here, like when me and Lena want to go out, we
just
just
take your car. You don't want to go anywhere because everything's too far.
Yeah, so annoying. Whereas for here, if me and Melina want to go out to eat anywhere, we can walk to so many different places. Even in Miami Beach, it's so nice just to be able to go out and walk to places. It just feels better.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think you think the issue that most of these places are having when it comes to rent being overvalued or higher is due to the fact that we don't take care of these kinds of spaces and we don't get rid of these homes and create more apartment complexes. You think that's the issue?
Yeah,
there's not enough supply for the demand.
Yeah, that's the issue. It's a physics problem. Too many people want to live in too confined an area, and you either have to start going up, or either the buildings are going up or the rents are going up, and there's literally no other way you can control for that. No amount of rent control, no amount of tricky public policy is going to change that.
What do you think about the whole working from home thing? Some people live in cities not because they want to, because their job necessitates it, even if they don't actually need to be at work. Do you think it's a good idea that we have an economy where people can work with a business in San Francisco whilst living in Wyoming, if they want to live in Wyoming, because like that's just their preferred lifestyle. Do you think like creating more of that opportunity might solve a lot of these issues?
I don't know. I'm not sure about work from home. That work from home like fundamentally changes the character of like our entire infrastructure. I don't know if it's good or not yet. I'll have stronger opinions later on for it, but
I believe that it's pretty fantastic for most workers in terms of like the income that they do and whatever it might be. And
one of the complaints
guess-
that I heard from because initially I was all for it because it seemed I would work from home. It sounds awesome. The biggest complaint that I heard, this was from the New York mayor, I think that, and everybody got mad at him. But he was saying that like,
yes, when he said you can't spend at the laundromat or you're not spending in the local economies.
yeah, basically your actual downtown city areas are dying because nobody's there to buy anything because they're all working from home. So like these like large infrastructure for commerce and commercial and other shit like or business, nobody's actually down there working anymore. So all those restaurants are just kind of like dying, which is an interesting problem. But maybe that just means that the layouts of the cities need to change and that's something they have to adapt to.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah. Didn't your friend, the one who looks the guy from New York who's always complaining about the rent prices in Manhattan?
Based Louis Rossman.
Oh
Yes. I feel like he had a lot to say about that topic. He was just basically saying like the businesses downtown are untenable.
Yeah, a lot of it is New York corruption specifically, making it really, really hard to do business in that city, and how certain financial incentive structures around how it was something to do with how mortgages are packaged financially that incentivizes never settling for like any lower price below a certain threshold, and it just really warps the economy in real estate in really interesting ways. I wish I could get more specific, but you know what? Someone will yell at them.
Are you talking about commercial property?
Specifically commercial property, but that also trickles down into like real estate investment.
Well, the problem with commercial property that people were running into was that when you sign a mortgage for a property, part of the repayment on that for commercial properties has to do with the amount of rent that you collect from people coming in. And the problem that you ran into was for some of these places, let's say that I get a certain mortgage on a property, on a commercial piece of real estate, and somebody comes in and they want to rent it. Let's say nobody can afford the current rent. If I drop the rent, technically I'm now having unfavorable terms on my loan and the bank is going to end up killing my loan. So you end up in this weird area where it's better to leave a place unoccupied looking for somebody to pay the proper rent than to lower the rents, because if you lower the rents, the bank's not going to secure that mortgage anymore. So it was a really weird like commercial real estate investment problem. I don't know if New York is still having that problem, but
yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think New York Mayor Adams is like very considerate of like being downtown in Manhattan is just super expensive if you're just going there to work. Like just spending time having to travel down there, the food down there, everything that you're spending money on is overpriced. So it stands to reason that the people who are working from home, if they don't have a reason other than being forced to for their job, like they wouldn't want to be there. Instead of creating an environment that draws people in and makes them want to spend their dollar there, they kind of want to force the whole issue by making it mandatory through your job. And I just don't think that kind of model is a good one.
sure.
Because have you spent time in Manhattan? Like everything I've ever had to buy there was like ghastly overpriced and not worth $1. If I didn't have to be in Manhattan for work, I wouldn't want to be there.
A little bit, yeah. I think I largely agree with you. Miami has actually kind of poisoned me on prices. Miami has probably been I say Miami. Let me be more specific.
Miami's broken.
Yeah, Brickell and Miami Beach are probably some of the most comically it's actually funny. Like I just laugh. Like we went to breakfast yesterday and like an itty bitty glass of orange juice, like a half thing or whatever.
$8.
No, it's $10, and it's just like it's fun. It's actually funny. Like I'm like laughing. We went to breakfast like 2 days ago. I was like, they're not even trying. Like they don't even try to mask how absolutely absurd it is. Like $10 for like I could probably buy. This might be but I'm pretty sure I could get like 2 or 3 gallons of orange juice from the store for $10. Like it's insane. I'm like, okay, but
you just go to the market and buy like 50 oranges for that price. It's stupid.
Yeah, it's insane. But Miami is definitely East Miami, like the Brickell area, and then like Miami Beach have been some of the most comically absurd places I've ever been to in my life.
You can't convince me any of that is even remotely necessary. It's just that's the standard that's been set, so they're meeting the market. Right, but that's not like what is necessary based off costs and be able to be profitable. They just charge that because they know people won't have to pay because everyone else is truly charging something comparable. So
possibly, but I bet it's because no, actually, I don't think that. I think it's because the rents are so fucking high. Because there's always places that are going out of business and shit around here too. It's not like all the places are mad profitable and everybody's getting paid a ton of money and shit. I think that like the workers have to take home a decent paycheck to afford to live here, and because all the rents are so fucking high, I think. But
Mm.
Yeah, because it's
Do you
insane.
think you should be able to earn a Manhattan wage but live in like Ohio?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Why would a company do that though? Why would they pay you to live at the standard living cost of Manhattan when you're not living there?
That's
Ooh.
called remote work, baby. If I'm
Yeah,
worth in
but if you're
Manhattan and you have a
Well,
Manhattan firm,
I know there's some jobs that offer you certain salaries when you go into work there, based off also the cost of living in the area,
that
if
shit is
absolutely
cringe.
necessary. But if we're basing your take home income based off of what you produce to them and how you're valued on the market, then yeah, I have no issue.
My feeling is, listen, if I'm gonna make your company a certain amount of money, you better pay me the amount of money I'm making your company, and then
That's
based on
it.
like competitive market rates. Not just because I live in some dirt poor area doesn't mean that like I'm not about to tell I'm not about to tell August to go move to Sudan so I can pay him half the money or some shit. Like that's up. But that's just my opinion.
I know there's some jobs that offer you relocation money, or if they live in like if cost of living in that area is super high, there are certain jobs that like account for that when they're giving you their salary.
Mm-hmm.
I know my brother, when he negotiated some of his tech salary, he factored in the cost of living in the spot when he was like negotiating being able to work from home and things like that. And yeah, so if that's the case, sure. But outside of that, I think they're generally paying you because of what you bring them, and they tell you to figure out your own cost of living, because there's plenty of people who work for tech startups or different things like that in Brooklyn or New York, and certainly are not getting compensated for the fact that they're paying exorbitant amount of rent prices. So I don't think that's the case in most situations.
I could be wrong, but I worked for a Fortune 500 company, and that was the case. Like you could have the same job, but depending on where in the country you lived, you got paid differently.
Jeez.
Well, it's
I
possible.
think I think that's pretty normal standard practice for big companies.
Yeah, I don't know.
It
That
depends a
sounds.
lot on your role, and how much bargaining power you have going in. So at the company I work for, I straight up said to them, like, I'll take a 20K cut to work remotely because I really value the time that I save working remotely, and
Yeah,
they
that's
were
fair.
all for it.
Yeah, I just think it would solve a lot of housing issues if you give people more flexibility to live in the place they want to live to, while still doing the jobs that they want to do.
It's just that
Provided
so much
provided
is
it
like
doesn't hurt
physical.
your company tremendously. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking.
Like the kinds of jobs that can be fully remote feels like such a narrow band of like what makes up most of the economy.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, when you say narrow, what do you mean? Because I feel like there's actually a lot of jobs that should be fully remote, and there's really no reason for you to be there in person.
So there's like a lot of bureaucratic paperwork jobs that could be remote pretty easily, but like things like anything involved with like the fundamentals of like living, like anything to do with food or waste
Sure.
or with like building anything.
Yeah, but I
So
feel like
much
a
of our
good
economy is
majority of our
tied up in that.
people work in office jobs. Like that's like a large segment of our population, and a lot of those jobs just require you to come in, and sit at your fucking desk, and type on a computer. That is like a good segment of people. Even administrative jobs within hospitals don't really require you to talk to folks other than to just send stuff and send emails. There's plenty of those jobs that folks can outsource to people, and they already do. They already outsource a lot of these jobs to different countries. So the whole remote thing is like, I feel like you could definitely take a large segment of the workforce and transform it. I don't even
Uh,
think we're even tapping into like one third of it.
I don't know. Yeah, we're probably nowhere near close to like how many jobs could we get out of cities and out of offices.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I underrate office work a lot in my
You
mind.
underrate it?
Yeah, I just because it's so much of what I work in.
Uh-huh.
And then when I look around and see how much like actual shit has to be done by physical people, maybe I'm just overcounting it. But I don't know. It seems like a much smaller piece of the economic pie, in my opinion. Especially just stuff to do with transport. Once you get into logistics, there's a whole lot of people that have to move things physically.
Yes, yes. And look, I think we're all in agreement that there's certain positions that can't be done so we don't even talk about those. But I think that you'd sizably decrease the amount of people needing apartments in specific cities if you turned their jobs remote and if it was very feasible to do so. And I think there's also a tremendous benefit from the business itself. I remember after the pandemic, there's a bunch of places that actually closed down their office but kept their business operational because they were cutting down on cost when it came to rents, because they didn't need office spaces anymore. They were cutting down on a lot of expenses for like food and different things and cleaning and all this other shit that was weighing down on the business. And now they run complete remote and it's efficient. And I don't know if you've had this experience working office jobs, but I was often paid to look busy, which is probably not only the most like offensive thing, but it's also very draining mentally for me, and I think lowered my overall productivity. I would have to stretch out work that I could do in 3 to 4 hours, and I'd have to stretch it out to 8 because I was getting paid for 8.
Oh yeah,
And if I
what's
finished early, like it was seen as a bad thing, which is, as a government employee, that really fucked me up. And so when I think of overall work productivity, when I think of like the lifestyle that you want to live afterwards, in terms of being able to move where you want to move, and I think how it benefits the business as well, I think it's a net benefit for the most part, except in some circumstances.
there's a really interesting free economics episode talking about the whether or not work from home was like economically efficient, because a lot of the citations that people, especially bosses, are against work from home is like you'll be less productive in some way, you'll be distracted, you won't be able to collaborate effectively with your coworkers. So far it seems to be mostly a wash, um, but it's also just getting rid of, so like real estate is such a huge cost for most
Yeah,
businesses.
yeah.
Wow.
Wait,
Well,
sometimes that Elon doesn't like it. I've heard him say that. I've never heard him say why. Do you guys know why Elon hates the whole work from home shit?
I don't like thinking about Elon Musk.
I think
be
in
honest.
general it's hard, but like there is a feeling that when people are in office environments, they're more productive. There's two ways you can approach it basically. One is that you want your employees to be collaborating together because it like has kind of like a productivity modifier or multiplier, where when they're together in the same environment, doing better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's one feeling. The second feeling, and I hope this isn't true, but the second feeling might be that bosses don't like the ideas of employees working from home, because then they know that they only have to work for a couple hours and they're goofing off the rest of the day. But somehow they like bullshit themselves into believing that employees in the office are working diligently for 8 hours. I hope that's not the case, but I wonder if that's the case, because that
Dude,
feels
some
like
manager
something.
brains are wild.
Yeah, that feels like a manager brain thing to me, where a manager's thinking that like, if you're at home, you're going to be goofing off all day, but I know that if you're in the office, you're working for 8 hours, which nobody does. But yeah, I don't know. I could be wrong. I hope that's not the case, but it feels like a manager brain thing to say.
One thing that like a communications change that came out of remote work, as people transitioned back into the office, that communication became like way more efficient even in the office, because people began to prioritize in their minds like what needs to be taken care of and addressed immediately, what can I leave in like a Slack message randomly,
Yeah.
even if they're like across the hall. Like you no longer have people like interrupting each other as much.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like hybrid is probably where a lot of jobs are going to go,
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
because fuck commuting, holy shit, what a waste of time.
Yeah, I heard people were dying on their commutes to work.
Yeah, that's actually a thing. I would never do that. People got mad at me because I said that in LA too. I don't know who the lives in LA that's not making at least $200,000 a year. I could not imagine driving an hour to and from work. Fucking kill me. I can't think of a bigger way to waste my youth and my life than driving an hour to and from work. I thought my 20-minute commute in Omaha was dog shit. Having to drive 25 minutes to go from Omaha to Council Bluffs. Driving an hour in traffic every day sounds soul crushing. Fuck that. I'll move somewhere else and earn $50,000 a year before I earn $90,000 a year in LA, dying in that traffic every day. But
It is, especially when, I mean, you talk about traffic. Imagine taking public transport, which is even less efficient over there.
well, I don't mind public transport as much because I can like do things. Like I didn't mind taking buses and shit in Sweden, just because like I like for long train rides I could just take my laptop out. That was awesome. Or I could like be on my phone, I could be doing emails, I could do shit. But driving is like driving is the perfect torture of like having no engagement of your brain yet still simultaneously requiring your full attention. It's the worst of both worlds. I hate it so much.
Yeah. I do think it is worse, but I can say that having to take long commutes as well. If you're having to bus an hour and a half or an hour each way, like it drains you. But yeah, you are right that it is worse after.
Yeah.
I remember what it was like to be an efficient public transport system and then having to take buses in Los Angeles on a regular basis and take the public transport, and that shit I dreaded it every single time. I did it because it was necessary, but it wasn't pleasant at all. I think long commutes in general just really f people up. And I think I remember reading a study. I think like they were doing this. I think it was on Slate or was it Fox? That like they had a really good, well-written article about how people are just dying, and like their odds of depression are significantly higher. Their health implications are worse in terms of like outcomes for long-term health in general. And you ask anybody who's doing these long commutes, and none of them feel great about them, and they all like dread it every day. And so, yeah, I know. I just ill. And so, I we talked about rent prices, correct? And we talked about that extensively and how you want to bring apartment buildings. What are some other things that you feel like societally people are feeling the crunch of that you think need fixing? Because we talked about personal responsibility, which I think is always important. What do you think society-wise you would want to change?
I always warn people whenever somebody feels like there's one problem that they have that'll fix everything, you always have to be really cautious of that. So I want to warn against that, but then I'm going to say that I do feel like the zoning shit is just a really big deal, and I see a lot of downstream effects from having better zoning. So like there's several big things that living in more and higher density areas affect. One is you don't have a car payment. That's already like incredibly nice to not have to worry about a car payment.
True.
Also, two, and either my cars were exceptionally shitty or people just don't know the experience. I don't know what it is. I just might have had exceptionally shitty luck. But people don't talk about this enough, okay? Whenever people talk about cars, they always talk about car payments, okay? Car payments were whatever for me. I bought, I think my very first car might have been cash because it was like $1,000 for this god-awful Dodge Neon. But the biggest thing wasn't car payments or gas. Gas was never an issue. It
Insurance?
was maintenance.
Okay.
It was breaking a wheel, popping a tire, having your check engine lights that are eating through your fucking engine, your O2, like all of this shit.
Yeah.
That's what fucking sucked. For car maintenance was the worst. Every fucking time, you know, my brake rotor, not my rotors, my brake pads are going out, and then I go in and I find out that I've run down my fucking rotors, and they're telling me to replace all this shit, and it's like maintenance on cars sucks. So higher density areas with public transport, get rid of car payments and car maintenance. That's nice. I think higher density areas, it can do both, paradoxically. Higher density areas can both encourage and discourage more socialization. It can encourage it because, if you want to hang out with friends, if they're right there, that's awesome. But it could discourage it because you're less incentivized to get to know your apartment neighbors and everything, maybe.
Just on the higher density, it's not enough just to have higher density. I think you have to have a good amount of city planning.
Yes. Yeah, that's an important part. Yeah.
Well managed, because if it's not, it doesn't feel, there's no incentive to walk everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you are in a much easier, like that's also a really big part of it. But keep going.
Being able to walk to do social things, I think, is fun, so you don't have to plan it. Like me and Melina want to go watch a movie. There's a movie theater we can walk to that's like a 7-minute walk away. That's awesome. Yeah. I really think that there's a lot of positive knock-on effects from having cities that are planned around biking. When I was in Copenhagen and you look at those intersections and like there's like 4 cars pulling up to a stoplight and then next to them there's like 150 people on bikes, the positive effect of getting to bike everywhere probably gives you a lot of mental positivity just because you're exercising and moving more. You've got more actual physical exercise, which is better for your health. Your health is going to have positive knock-on effects economically, sociopolitically, like everything. Like I think that having cities built around biking is probably really, really good for you. And then there's climate change and shit like that. Who cares? I'm just saying for like the immediate shit is like way better. I feel like city planning is a really big thing that can go a long ways to help alleviate a lot of the kind of modern issues we have with really fucking expensive cities that are like making us miserable, in my opinion. But
yeah. As somebody who bikes everywhere, I agree with that. I love biking. Biking, honestly, I get shamed for it sometimes because people are like, "How you a grown man? You still bike around?" I'm like, well, shut the f up. This shit is amazing. It feels good health wise. You're moving about, you're seeing your city in a different way. You're not like always committed to the same routes every single time. And then also, you feel like you have a certain sense of freedom, which otherwise I didn't. If I always need to grab my car, always was just relegated to the same metro line. So yeah, biking is definitely a game changer. Having a good bike and be able to move about is like
yeah. And then the next game changer is having a city built for bikes, because biking in cities where the biking infrastructure sucks and cyclists suck and not many of them exist, so nobody knows how to act around them, is kind of stressful and annoying.
Yeah. Let me see here. You talked about, what did you talk about just before this? You were talking about the cost. Oh, I want to talk about this. I didn't know this, but like depending on where you live, childcare is f***ing expensive. Some people were telling me that they were paying just as much on like daycare stuff than they were like rent. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
So people that are talking about $4,000 a month are f***ing wild, but I think it's pretty normal that you could easily pay, even for a working class person, like $500 to $1,000 a month on daycare. I think you could easily pay that. $500 USD to $1,000 USD a month on daycare easily. Yeah, it's insanely expensive.
Someone's saying 24 G's a year. Hold on. Let me look. I'm actually super curious. The reason why is like my niece. I'm pretty involved. And I asked her dad, like, I'm like, yo, how much you pay for, like, because I was curious, and he said he's having to pay like $250 a month, and I thought that was like crazy low because I'd heard such crazy numbers before. You think they were paying 500 to 1,000 on average?
So I just Googled this because I was curious. According to MoveOn.org, the average daycare cost in the United States is $216 per week. So about $850 a month. Yeah, that's average, $850 a month.
Okay. Good Lord.
Yeah, that sucks.
And
That's
then-
one of
and
the
they're
reasons why you
saying
get like
childcare-
stay-at-home moms in
they're saying
working areas. Yeah.
childcare-
Go ahead.
Childcare is on average $694 a week. Which
What does
if you
childcare
add that
mean?
let me see.
Wait, are you including daycare in that? Because unless you're,
Yeah, I think it is included.
that sounds kind of expensive, but I don't know. Some people seem like they spend a lot of money on their kids. I don't know what the they're doing with all that, but
Do you think like pre-K and like childcare should be subsidized? I have no idea.
Yes, I think daycare should be subsidized.
pre-K I think is associated with so many positive outcomes. I think it should be. I feel like something you should offer kids for free. Yeah.
The survey.
I'm heading out.
I
I'm gonna
wonder
go
what
eat later, guys.
See ya.
I'm actually curious. Yeah, that feels like a lot.
That's one of the
If-
nicest
if
things
that
about like
average is true, like so 6 times 4 times 12, that's coming up to about 30 G's a year.
well,
you're
I don't know what
spending-
all that childcare cost is. I don't know what you're talking about there, but
I think it's probably including everything, including diapers, food, formula, anything else, doctor appointments, whatever it might be. It probably includes everything, but that's a lot.
Maybe.
If you're paying 30 grand a year for a child,
that sounds high. That sounds like some middle class, some not real nice shit. But like, yeah, like 10 to 15K a year could be possible depending on what you're doing. Yeah, I could see that. That's why a lot of people just have one parent stay home because it's not worth it. It's not worth it to have another parent working when they could just have that parent staying home taking care of the kid. That's why you're so excited when
because
your
most
kids
of their
can
income
finally
would be
go to
going
school.
that anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when your kids start school, now you've unlocked all that time again. So
So, yeah, so I think that's probably something that if someone says they're feeling the crunch of that, then I would definitely understand. And also disincentivizes people from having kids in its entirety because it's far too expensive to even imagine a world where you can't afford to try to even have a job or anything like that.
Yeah.
Which is, do you think that's something that needs fixing?
probably. That's another nice thing about high density housing is it makes things more affordable and everything. You don't have the car payment and everything, which means that stuff like marriage and moving out becomes easier, which are big precursors to having children or having good children at least. Yeah.
Okay. So you said housing, you want to create more apartment complexes that allow to make things more cheap. You briefly touched on the daycare stuff, and you feel like even though the housing might also figure some of that out, what are some other things? I'm curious about what are solutions, because we often talk about things are too tough. What are some other solutions that you would come up with to fix some of the economic situations that you feel like society, if they keep going this way, is probably untenable?
I don't know. Even those solutions are pretty untenable because housing stuff is kind of locked. You can't really do much to break up like zoning laws. So I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough. I need to spend a stream like going through like what are the best realistic solutions you can do, because the housing stuff is locked because your biggest voter base are going to be homeowners that are never going to vote for higher density places. So you're like stuck there. That's like a dead end.
I feel like when I've heard socialists speak online, and the creators, they often feel like their political ideology and their economic political agenda would fix a lot of these issues. From your side of the aisle, what do you think would be able to do that? If they're saying like, well, through socialism and whatever it might be, we fix a lot of these problems. What is your counter to some of the ideas, or like your counter solutions if you have it?
That's a good question because I need to figure out, like, the problem is I don't even know what's real sometimes. I have to spend, I got to do a lot of research to figure out what's real, because there's a lot of problems that are complained about on the internet that are overrepresented because of the demographics here that I don't think are problems. I don't believe that student loans are a real problem for most people to be able to pay back. I think that there are plenty of affordable schools you can go to. There's no excuse to be going to a private out-of-state school if you're going to have huge problems affording it. There's no reason. There's absolutely no reason. So when people are complaining about not being able to afford their student loans, You find out a person has like $100,000 in debt. It's like, I don't want to build society around you. If I did do anything, I would just make it illegal for you to have made the choices that you made. You shouldn't be allowed to take out like, oh, actually, maybe one change I would make is maybe no subsidized loans for people going to out of state schools. Maybe that would be a thing I would make. I would make that rule.
So just to be clear, when you say no subsidy, does that mean that they wouldn't be able to have access to student loans for out of school, out of state?
Not federally subsidized ones, no, which are the ones that I think that most people take. But yeah, so like, but that's like student loans are like the number one problem complaint on the internet, but it's just because it's a lot of people that are young kids that like, have student loans, you know, so they complain about it, you know, but I don't think that's like significantly hurting society or anything.
Maybe it's because I've never thought of ever going to school in the States, but every time I hear what the prices are, I just have a hard time imagining that these are justifiable.
Well,
And more than that, whether they're out or in state, that we allow young people to take out loans that are guaranteed. I don't know, you can say it's justified that they're guaranteed, whatever, but I just think it's crazy that young people are allowed to make that decision.
so here's a big issue when it comes to the affordability of education, is that people. So when you conversations about cost of education in the United States have to be very complicated and honest about what people pay, because there's a sticker price for how much school costs, maybe $15,000-$20,000 a year. But in the United States, we engage in really heavy forms of price discrimination, meaning very few people, if any, at certain schools pay the sticker price. Very few people are actually paying $15,000 a year. Oftentimes you get subsidized loans. You've got things like Pell Grants. You've got things like student aid. You've got things like scholarship. There are so many different ways that the average cost of education, what people are actually paying, is much lower than the sticker price. But people will look at the sticker price and go, oh my God, everybody's paying $20,000 a year on average. Like, no, that's absolute bullshit. If you're a smart kid, and you like are getting good grades and you want to go to a school in the United States of America, my understanding is you will always get into a good school. Full stop. If you kick ass in high school, you study, and you do good on your standardized tests, you are not going to be stopped from going to a good school because you don't have the money to do it. Even Harvard will take, it doesn't, you can be broke as if you qualify, you get in, they will take you in and they'll pay for everything. So
yeah, but don't you think that's such a small minority of students that like what you're describing doesn't apply to the vast majority of students?
Well, I'm just saying that like I think we have to make smarter decisions around going to college. If your grades aren't that good, like maybe like community college for 2 years is good to knock out some of your, you know, prereqs, that like that's fine, and then transferring to an in-state school to finish. But like if your grades are like you're like a 2.5 GPA student, you don't need to be going to an out-of-state school. That's fucking insane to me. Those choices, I don't know if they should be banned, but like you just shouldn't even be allowed to do that. That's wild, unless you've got the money for it.
What if the kind of program that you are thinking you're interested in as an 18-year-old, like not every state has universities that offer everything or offer it at like a well-known school that has like a good necessary program. Isn't that possible that if I want to study something specific, that the kind of school I want to go to may be better off out of state?
So I don't know what it's like in Canada. I think in Europe you'd be correct, but in the United States, our state schools are fucking insane. Like, it's funny walking around with Melina, I remember, and I didn't even notice until a while, because Europeans will make fun of us for school and shit, but in the United States, our state schools are like fucking, like, whole cities. Like, a European might, like, say, like, oh, U.S. education is overpriced, you guys suck, we get it for free, and then you can send them to, like, Wyoming State University, and they'll walk through and they'll see the biggest gym that they've ever seen in their entire life. Okay, they'll see like entire campuses where they're like, how many cities did I just walk through? Like, so no, I think most people can go to most state schools and find most programs. Now, some are going to be better in some areas. There's going to be some hyper niche things like law school where the school you go to really matters. But for the most part, if you want to do most jobs, I think you're going to find most of those programs available in most state schools. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
But if you're somebody where you're thinking like, if you're thinking like, oh, but the best program for this is in some other state, okay, that's fine, then qualify into it. If you're a 2.0 GPA student, your mind doesn't need to be on like, I gotta get to the most competitive fucking, you know, UCLA, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you don't. No offense, I'm sorry, but like, you don't have the grades for it. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. Do community college for 2 years and study up or do some other shit, but you don't need to go to that expensive, ultra competitive private school if your GPA is below like a 3.0. There's just no reason for you to do that, in my opinion.
Okay. I don't know enough about college to fight on any of this stuff. I think this is the only point that I ever bring up when I think about this. That kind of makes me double take.
Sure.
But I have a hard time accepting that it is acceptable to give somebody student loans that are that high fresh out of high school with very little financial literacy, especially, and it's not just like it's a child, it's now he's an adult and it's a blank slate. Like there is a tremendous amount of social pressure for people to go into university and to figure out their stuff right after school. And so even I remember guidance counselors pressuring me. I remember teachers pressuring me. And what I think when you have a culture and you're taking young adults who have been given little to no financial information, I think it's very irresponsible, societally speaking, to allow them to take these kinds of loans that are guaranteed. And mind you, like I know people who've gone through medical procedures for like injuries in the States, and those are not guaranteed. They're just like, I'm never going to pay it back. So it's just, and not only that's necessarily a good thing, I'm just saying, when I'm looking at these young adults, I don't think they should be allowed to make that kind of decision, especially on that kind of loan. Am I crazy in saying like that society seems a little bit broken for that reason? Or
no, I don't think I necessarily disagree with you. I can understand the apprehension there. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Right.
So like if we talk about like free education, that's fine, but it's going to come at a cost to where like it's going to be more restrictive or selective. But I don't necessarily disagree with you on principle. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what's crazy is, and maybe this is just defense spending, but having lived in the States, I felt like the taxation wasn't that substantially lower than where I am in Canada. But I feel like where I'm living, I'm serious. I don't feel like you guys.
I agree with you. When I'm in fucking California,
your taxes are not that much lower. I'm talking about a few percentage points. Yeah. But the amount of services and like subsidies that we offer to the average American, average Canadian is like substantially higher. Yeah. Now maybe that's a population issue, and there's much more stuff going on. But like on the outside, I'm like, I don't understand why there's like very little support in that.
Yeah, no, so I don't disagree with you. When I'm living in LA, I'm paying like an effective tax rate of like 45%. And I'm like, I thought Americans made fun of Europeans for this type of shit. Like this is insane. So yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you. Although for poor people, it gets a lot more manageable. But if you're making money, yeah, your tax rates in certain states, if you're living like New York City or like California,
forget state income tax. Even federally speaking, it's comparable, if not higher than like, what is the highest bracket for income tax federally?
It's probably like past like $500,000 or something, I think.
Right, and you get taxed what, like 30%, 35%, something like
that. 37%. Although you got to be careful because like in the United States, like I'm pretty sure the bottom, again, it's sticker price versus what's actually being paid. In the United States, I'm pretty sure that the 50% and bottom earners in the United States pay no federal income tax at all. So it's it's kind of complicated, but
yeah. I think that pretty much covers the whole school. Okay, so we talked about student stuff. They always talk about that. I've seen definitely socialists online talk a lot about housing. And here's the interesting thing. I think I hear people say how ridiculous a lot of these types sound, the socialist people. But I do think they're one of the few folks who sound like they speak to the issue a lot, one. And two, and maybe there's like a populist thing, but they speak to the issue a lot. And two, they do come with solutions that they feel are real. Be it come housing, be it come healthcare and stuff like that. Do you feel like the other side of the aisle that exists within the liberal sphere also brings that kind of discourse forward as often, or solutions as often? Or do they just want to uphold the status quo?
Which two are we comparing? Are we comparing conservatives with liberals, or?
No, I'm comparing like the more socialist types to the more, traditional libs.
Yeah, I don't like the social systems. I don't think usually their systems are like, their solutions are whole system overhauls, which I think are kind of stupid. Like get rid of the police, like all housing needs to be public housing, expropriate companies, stock, give it to employees. Like most of that shit is just fantastical. I don't care.
Right. And so what do you think the more progressive, like you guys, the more liberal, traditional liberals might propose ideas or policies that are more about small incremental changes? Do you feel like they actually do that often and they talk about these things? Because maybe I'm seeing these things from the outside, I'm not hearing it enough, but I don't feel like I hear them speak about these issues as often or with as much interest in finding solutions to them. But I could be wrong. Do you feel like my perception is inaccurate?
I feel like liberals have lots of solutions that they want to implement, and they do try, but the problem is conservatives in the United States have become unmanageable from 2008 onwards, to where they like explicitly state like our only job in office is to obstruct and f you over, because we don't want to give you any political wins. We don't want you guys to have good policies passing when a Democrat is the president, because why the f would we do that? So like McConnell has explicitly stated his job was to obstruct Obama for both terms. Like he didn't. We have in the United States, we've got like our Supreme Court picks. Obama didn't get his which he should have, which is an express thing that the president of our country can do. He can choose like the highest judges, and they didn't even let him do it, which is crazy for the first time in U.S. history. So you've got that conservatives are highly obstructionist, and then there's the problem that when conservatives are in power, they don't seem to get much done either. Like under Trump, they didn't really get anything done at all. So even when they're in power, they don't do much. So we have this kind of weird cancer that is slowly kind of like weeding itself out right now. We'll see where they end up in a couple years, but it's making it really hard to do much.
Right. I guess from the outset, it looks like the liberals are not trying to make any positive change. And you're essentially saying, no, they are, but the conservatives are just stopping them from doing so and doing so very efficiently.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm gathering?
Basically, yeah. Yeah. And conservatives, like if you look at the discourse in the United States, like conservatives are just obsessed with the dumbest shit right now. Like conservatives are talking about trans people all the time, groomers, like that's like all their conversation are these like niche stupid social issues, CRT, schools, and there's not anything having to do with like the economy or like any like real policies that we can talk about. It's just really annoying.
I mean, hey, that shit's efficient. The cultural war stuff definitely wins them votes.
Yeah, but
if they require them to make any real substantial change. So for the average person who already feels like apathetic to like the political system, they hear them talking about stuff and actually like, implementing real change in those areas that are irrelevant to their quality of life, and it's a double win. They don't even have to decrease your taxes. They don't have to do none of that. They can just talk about stopping like 0.1% of people from doing something stupid, and that's a win for them politically.
Yeah, I know, but it just sucks because they don't do anything with it. But yeah,
What's that?
it just sucks because they don't do anything. It's just annoying, I guess. But like, I can't even debate like right now. Like, if I wanted to debate a conservative, I can't debate them on like policy or anything because they just want to talk about like, you know, critical race theory and like LGBT groomers and like just like the dumbest shit in the world and how much I guess like arguing how deep they could take Trump into their throat or some shit. Like, there's just nothing to talk about.
But so you've chastised the socialist types because they want to just create revolution and change the system. But it actually sounds like the system you're describing is kind of broken in that the conservatives are not just doing this because they hate trans people. They don't care. It's politically expedient to do this because one, they don't have to make any substantial change and ruin their bottom line, and two, they win the voters. So for them within this system, it actually benefits their bottom line and their financial status to engage in this kind of behavior. And so doesn't that speak to the fact that the system in some ways is a bit broken, that they're incentivized to make as little change as possible, or at least like real tangible changes in the lives of the average person? Doesn't that mean that the system in some ways is kind of busted?
Nope, system's working perfectly as intended. But the problem is the people are broken right now. That's the issue. Like, it's expressing the will of the people, and right now the will of the people is historically fucking divided. That's the issue. Like, if you've got a bunch of people, that fucking hate everything and they just want to obstruct and they don't give a fuck about policy, then yeah, that's what the government's doing right now. Essentially, that's what the Republicans are representing. I think the system is working perfectly. It just sucks that it's a democratic system where the people that are being represented have like shitty ideas right now.
Okay. I think this is probably where we're going to separate.
Okay.
I feel like the system is working perfectly.
Yeah.
Just the people who are using the system are broken. Because
yes.
they're appealing to what the masses want.
Yes. And the problem isn't appealing to what the masses want. You should appeal to what the masses want because it's democracy. The problem is what the masses want right now is
Yeah, but see, I don't believe that. So this is the whole like the chicken and the egg thing. You believe that they're doing this because the masses wanted it, therefore. But that isn't true. We actually see in large mass how media really influences talking points socially, and how the hyperfixation on certain media companies or whatever it might be to engage in certain issues actually drives a lot of the public discourse. I don't think it just happens like, oh, people grassroots on Twitter start talking about things and then politicians follow suit. I don't believe that. I think it's a mixture of those two things. You don't think so, or no?
It's a feedback loop. Like, yeah, media can push us in a certain direction, but also people want to see that type of media. People don't want to see like educational, well-informed, like thoughtful media. They want to see like the hyper-partisan shit. That's what people like.
Okay, let's actually take two steps back. Let's say I agree with you. Let's say I agree with you that this is what the people want, and so as a result, we're getting this broken world or whatever it might be. What do you think makes Americans so substantially different that they're more concerned with this culture war nonsense than other things? Are Americans just born differently? Well, what is it?
I don't think Americans are unique there. I think it's yeah, actually, wait. I will say that America is pretty unique. And then we had a unique leader, Donald Trump, that like set things off in a very particular direction. Like he toxified a lot of the conservative party as well. Yeah. But one of the big tenets of Americanism, if that's a word, American exceptionalism, is we hate government. And a lot of American political thought is kind of stems from this fundamental distrust and hatred we have of the government. And our conservative party expresses that really well, and our liberal party fights amongst itself about it. And I think that's pretty unique to the United States that European countries don't really have to deal with. You don't have in Europe, you don't have, you're getting a little bit of it kind of sort of recently, but not even as much. In America, we just hate our government. The conservatives absolutely so.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a weird world to be in.
So you're saying this is what the people want, and it is what it is, so we just got to deal with it, because you can't really change what the people want other than like you engaging in public discourse.
Well, I think you can. I think you can change it. Yeah, we should. We should be.
Okay, so how do you change what the people want? If you're saying the people want the system, they want to talk about critical race theory and all this other stuff, how do you change that? And the system is playing into it, because based off what the people are saying they want, the system is creating this great feedback loop that buys into their outrage and all this stuff. How do you fix it?
Well, I mean, from my end, the thing that I try to do is what I say is that, like, liberals, people on the left, just need to get better at their messaging. They need to make a better effort to communicate things to people that disagree with them politically, and then do a better job at selling their ideas to the other side, instead of just assuming that they're self-evidently correct and then being, condescending and chastising everybody.
So you just think that if they get better with their messaging, that'll get to the people, and they're going to want to talk about serious issues?
I hope so. That's the specific area that I lean in on. There's probably other improvements that can be made in other people's areas as well, but...
Okay. All right. Well, then I think I'll just accept that answer. That's pretty good. Apparently, Cynthia G's talking about you. She's saying you are a white man.
Yeah, I got so many black women that are fucking DMing me and like standing the fuck out of me because I told you about that one weird debate I was on with the angry man, where like two other black guys came in, and for some reason, like an hour into this, it just became a slugfest of them like shitting on black women for causing all the problems in the black community. It's just like a really weird fucking debate to be in, yeah. But I had all my Aunt Alicia talking points, so I was like ready for the conversation.
Yeah, both sides of the aisle are so fucking cringe. The fact that these guys constantly come online, just like, I don't know why. This is one of the most cringy things about black folks. They just feel like they gotta talk about all their problems publicly. Everything gotta be like, well, you bitches did this. Like, yo, talk with each other offline. Like, why y'all gotta be messy online? And why is this discourse even happening this loudly and this like disrespectfully all the time? I just find it so absolutely cringe. And so sometimes people send me links of like, do you heard what this person said about black men? I'm like, bro, I already said this shit's whack. I'm not gonna say it 100 times and have to constantly air it. I find it really. I don't know. It just gives me such a like disappointed feeling when I see them going so loudly at each other all the time with the most extreme language. Like, forget who's right and who's wrong. Think about the mental psychological harm you're seeing of constantly seeing people from your own community loudly getting online to disrespect you. Like, imagine you're in a one-on-one relationship with somebody, okay? And your partner's airing out your problems publicly all day long. That's just what they do. They like, oh, my girlfriend's this and that. That psychologically fucks you up. And black people are so beholden to the community in a lot of ways because we feel like we're like almost guilted to talk about it all the time, that it's kind of similar. Like, every time I see these people say this stuff, I'm like, do you not realize you guys are just fucking people up, and this doesn't need to be a conversation that you have online all the time? But unfortunately, they profit from it. They make money from it. So there's like a financial incentive to engage in this kind of vitriolic behavior. And I don't think these conversations are productive. In fact, the more that I see them pass on, the more the vitriol continues to foment and just, I don't know. It
yeah,
really
that's kind of the... Yeah, I was going to say, that's kind of the issue that it feels like, where for at least the black community in the United States, at least online, there's this like huge feedback loop where you get black guys that are brought up in single mom families that are basically told their entire lives that black men are horrible people because of the experience that their moms had. And then these guys grow up and then they hate black women because of the experience that they had, and they come on and they see like issues in like black women communities, which they have issues, and then they start like blaming black women for all of the problems because that's the experience they grew up with, is being like told that they're shit their entire lives. And then black women will look at black men and they see like incarceration rates, they see a bunch of excuses made for systemic racism and all of that shit, and then how many single black moms there have that have been walked out by their single black fathers, and then they shit on black men. And basically both sides are just ready to, like, it's funny because like the black women that I've spoken to, the hardcore ones, are like, we need to divest, okay, abort black male babies and only date non-black men. And then the three black guys that I was on that panel with were basically saying, because what I said was, I thought that I was making a good point, and I didn't expect them to agree with me, but it was like, with the way that black women and black men talk about each other, you guys sound like you all want to veer off and just have the black community completely like get absorbed into the other communities. And all three of them in lockstep agreed. They were like, yes, the black community needs to be destroyed. It's horrible. Black women should go date other people. Black men should go date other people. I'm like, okay, well, holy shit. Yeah.
So that isn't entirely true for two reasons. One, the kind of people who would be open to talking to you agree with that notion. There's plenty of people who engage in some form of Pan-Africanism or loyalty to black folks who wouldn't feel comfortable talking to you. The people who are most likely going to be talking to you are the ones who are already thinking about leaving that community or dating outside or have the most negative things to say.
Sure.
There's plenty of people who don't lie in that role. But there's a selection bias, right? Who's going to come and debate destiny on black issues? Like,
well, to be clear,
most of the guys who really believe in these causes are similar to Fanatic in that they don't like the idea of coming on your platform to talk about it. And I understand why. It looks really messy. It looks kind of stupid to have a bunch of black folks yelling at each other and I'm not coming at you for this, on a white news platform. It is what it is. And so there's a selection bias there. So when you're saying like black men feel like this, but that's just not the truth. It's just the people that you're having on are going to talk to that extreme.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but it's not even the people that are just on my platform. It's like the black communities having these conversations even off my platform on their own shit. Like, I didn't realize how big all that Cynthia G shit is. Apparently she's going over our debate now, and like this whole divester like female community. When I had that conversation with the Anchorman or whatever, I got like 15 to 20 different black women in my Instagram DM saying like, oh yeah, this is so good, like hold black men accountable, blah blah. And I was like, holy shit. I think if you go and look at my YouTube video, I think like half the like top 50 comments are all black women that are saying like, yeah, fuck these black men, fuck BM is what they call each other, fuck these BMs,
because
like
you're
blah,
their
blah, blah.
Candace Owens. You're their Candace Owens.
No, yeah, I understand. I'm just saying that like these are huge conversations that are happening online, irrespective of my community, where like all these red pill black dudes are shitting on black women, even in their own communities. All these black women are saying fuck black men in their own communities. I understand there might be selection bias when it comes onto my shit, but it seems like these are conversations that are happening online, irrespective of if it's on my stream or not. Like, yeah,
this is akin to the whole people talking about the black conservative movement is huge. It's like, no, it's not. Yes, there's a bunch of black creators online who do all this talking and all this stuff, but overwhelmingly, most folks still vote left, even though they have certain values. Like, irrespective of how many black creators come out and are loud and you're having these conversations, I don't believe it's as rampant as people believe, but it is an online community. My issue, and I think what is making this issue seem larger than it actually is that I think black folks are the only community I see that, even though they have issues within each other, they're the only ones who take it online as much as possible. Asians have their own issues within their own cultural communities. Same thing with Latinos, but they don't do it nearly as often and as loudly, and they certainly don't do it in English. Like, I'm sure if I was an Asian person living in Asia, I probably hear about cultural issues all the time. But I don't know, just in an American context, it just seems like black folks are the only ones who do it this intensely. It's just, and I think that's what's making the issue seem larger than it actually is.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
1 second.
So many finally living up to the Destiny name, guys.